Our scripture today comes from Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 through 15. And this ends our 4-week study on Exodus that we've done. Now, there's a whole lot more in Exodus. There's another like 20-something chapters in there we could go through. But we're going to end this now with talking about food. This is our season of creation we're talking about. And so let's hear this story about how God provides for the Israelite people. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be as twice as much as they gather on other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for he has heard you complaining." And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites, and say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there was on the surface, on the wilderness, was a fine flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, 'What is it?' For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, 'It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat.'" So, I once had a friend in my life who I wanted to avoid at all costs. Do any of you have any friends like that? Now, she wasn't a bad person, but inevitably I would just hang around her a little too much, and we would come and hear about all the complaints that she had about life. And I could feel my energy and compassion being sucked from my soul. Now, maybe I'm being a little melodramatic. I mean, I wasn't withering to death or anything. But I think many of us have had someone in our life that needed more than we can give. Can I hear an amen to that? Amen. Wow, I didn't think this was that universal. At first, the complaints that my friend had to share were legitimate. They were about things that were life-threatening or dealing with economic distress. But at some point along the way, when things were getting better, the complaining did not stop. I began to see her in a whole different light, and that her whole sense of identity was wrapped up in complaining, even if the thing that she was complaining about was no longer urgent or life-threatening. Now, I finally had to cut off ties with this person, because if she was never going to change, then there was no reason for me to try to help her. And it sounds kind of harsh, doesn't it? But you've had to do that before, haven't you, with other people in your lives? Now, I wonder if something similar is happening to the Israelites. After 400 years of being enslaved, and after having generations of baby boys thrown in the Nile to be killed, and after all the other hardships they experienced, could the Israelites not handle the freedom that God offered them through the Exodus? "The water is bitter," the Israelites cry in Exodus chapter 15. "What are we to drink?" they grumbled. "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, at least we would have had plenty of food," the Israelites say in chapter 16 of Exodus. In chapter 17, the Israelites again are facing a water shortage, and they come to Moses and they grumble once more. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Now, are you all sensing a pattern here? They grumble. We're only a little over 6 weeks into their what became a 40-year wandering in the desert. And the people have complained again and again about needing water, about needing food, about needing security. For 3 chapters in a row, the people grumble. Now, if we go back to the beginning of Exodus, where we began our sermon series 4 weeks ago, you'll remember that Moses was called by a burning bush, by God out of a burning bush. God said to Moses, I have heard my people's cries. I have seen the injustice that the Egyptians have put them through. I've seen the oppression that they're going through. And I'm sending you, Moses. You're going to go out and you're going to save my people. And if you remember, Moses kind of complained about that too, didn't he? He grumbled about it. He said, I'm not even a good speaker. And why would they listen to me? And yet he went. In the beginning of Exodus, the Israelites lament their plight. And God hears them. And God sends one of their own to rescue them and set them free. But the people are restless and forgetful and ungracious. Too soon they lay all the blame upon Aaron and Moses, saying, well, you got us out of there, but what plan do you have now? I'm torn when I read these scriptures from Exodus, because, I want to tell a sermon that don't complain, stop complaining. It's like when you go to the customer service desk and there's a $5 charge for whining. Anybody ever seen that? I don't think I've ever been charged that, even though I probably deserved it once or twice. You see, I've never suffered from hunger in my life. I've been blessed by family and friends, and I've had employment all my life. I've had a solidly middle-class upbringing. I've always known somebody who I could rely on if I needed something. When I was growing up, I always had food in my refrigerator, and I had 3 meals a day that my parents would provide for me. And even in my struggling college years, when I couldn't rub 2 nickels together, I at least had a meal plan. And if I didn't have a meal plan, at least I knew where all the food was after the special events they have. You could live off of the grapes and the cheese and the crackers that they have at major universities. So maybe I don't understand the fear that the Israelites are feeling. Maybe I don't fully comprehend the fear that a mother would have for their hungry child or for their thirsty livestock. And let's not forget that the Israelites are no longer a people with a home or with an identity. They are homeless. They're wandering in the desert. There is no shelter, no city, no country to call their own. So maybe their complaining is legitimate. And don't we complain? We complain about taxes. We complain about politicians. We complain about the person who cuts us off when we're driving on I-66 or I-81, right? We complain about the weather being too hot, or being too cold, or too wet, or too dry. How many of you complain about all that? Don't lie. We complain, or maybe I should say we grumble. But there's a difference between crying out to God for deliverance and for crying over something things we can control. You see, grumbling occurs because our hearts and minds just aren't in the right place. We just fall in that pattern like my friend did of just complaining for complaining's sake. And I think we grumble sometimes because we want somebody else to solve the problem. We just don't want to deal with it anymore. My kids do this all the time. Your kids do this? Nod your head if you say yes. My children will complain that there is nothing to eat in the house. And I will sit there and I will say, all right, we have a loaf of bread, we got peanut butter, we got jelly. You can make yourself a sandwich. We have a microwave, and we have soup. You open up the can of soup, you pour it into the bowl, you microwave it for a minute and a half. You have an instant meal. We have Eggo waffles always in the refrigerator. You can make yourself a couple of Eggos. Yeah, you all are nodding your heads. So you go through the exact same thing. So whatever actually happens, though, after a few minutes of me making this list, and I usually have a list written down by my bed, because, it's the what's next, They say, no, I don't want to make it. I want you to make it.
You make it better.
Oh, yes, and they do. Oh, yeah, you're right. I forgot that one. But your eggs taste so much better than when you do it. Isn't that something we do when we grumble? We don't want it to be our problem. We want someone else to solve it for us. But despite their grumbling, we learn in reading these stories from Exodus chapter 15, 16, and 17 that God does hear their cries. God tells Moses and Aaron what to do. In one chapter, in chapter 15, Moses casts a piece of wood into the pool of water that's bitter, and the water becomes drinkable. In our reading today, we hear that quails and manna. Manna is the word for what is it, by the way. So whenever you go to the Moose Lodge and you wonder if it's chicken or pork, how many of you are laughing at me? Oh, I shouldn't laugh. I'm sorry. You weren't there. You say manna. It's manna. You know, and just say that next time and see what they say. Say that your pastor told you to say it's manna. Sometimes I wonder if the chicken was actually fish. And in chapter 17, when the people are dealing with a water shortage again, Moses strikes a rock and a spring comes forth and nourishes the people. It's easy to think that our lesson for the sermon today is don't complain, because that'd be a great one, but it's one we like to say to our kids all the time. Don't complain, there are starving kids in Africa. I've heard it all the time. But if we do that, if we miss the point of this story, then we miss the greater lesson that's found in these chapters of Exodus. You see, for 3 chapters in a row, the people grumble. For 3 chapters in a row, God listens to them. For 3 chapters in a row, God saves them. For 3 chapters in a row, God provides. And so the lesson in today's scripture is to trust God. And it's to trust God in the little things and the big things. Big things like being freed from slavery. Little things like what's going to happen the next day. Does this mean that we'll get comfortable? Does this mean that God is going to give us everything? Probably not, because here's the other lesson that we hear from Exodus. You see, they ate manna and they ate quail every day, but God provided only enough for that day. And if people tried to store it in their pockets or hide it or try to resell it to another person because other people were still hungrier than others, it would turn into rotten food in their pockets. They were told to collect extra on that 6th day for the day of Sabbath, but every other day they were only required to take as much as they could eat. Kind of like going to the buffet, right? Golden Corral, you don't want to take too much. My kids do this all the time. They end up having like 3 plates in front of them of macaroni and cheese. They only eat one. It wastes, and we don't need to do that. And so God spent 40 years with these Israelites trying to get them to understand that they needed to trust God in all things. And God was trying to condition them, one day at a time. Trust me, I'm going to take care of you. And they seem not to get it. The truth is, we're not that different from the people freed by God through his servant Moses. That's the one thing I love about reading the Old Testament, is that the people really seem real in there, don't they? There's not any of this false piety going on. The people struggle. And later on, and close to chapter 30, you have the people making a golden calf to worship when Moses is gone too long. And God tells them, well, because you're worshiping that golden calf, you're going to be stuck here in the desert for 40 years. It's like God said, you have to have a whole generation or 2 generations pass away before I'm going to give you your promised land. The truth is, we cling to the familiar, even when it hurts us. We're afraid of risking. We're stubborn, right? We are afraid of being hungry or thirsty and homeless. And so we do anything and everything to trick ourselves into thinking that we are safe and secure, even if we're not. And I think what we've witnessed the last few weeks in our world should remind us that we are not as safe and secure as we think. All it takes is a wildfire to come through and knock people out of their homes, or for a hurricane to move its path over a little bit, or gain too much strength, and look at hundreds of thousands of people have lost everything. Hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, terrorism, these are things that people have experienced. The people of Mexico City, the people of London, the people of Puerto Rico and Florida and Texas and Washington and Louisiana and Oregon and all those other states all have experienced firsthand what it means to lose safety and security in the face, and they're facing their own wandering in the desert. I think many of us face that same wandering in the wilderness when we've lost a loved one, or when we've been diagnosed with an illness that we can't control, or we've lost our jobs, or we've been surprised by the actions and betrayal of a spouse or a child or a parent. And so the question that comes up is it okay to grumble? Is it okay to complain? Is it okay to cry out for help and God's mercy? Well, yes, because God listens, and God saves, and God provides. And then, when that happens, we don't have to grumble anymore. But it's hard to do. It's hard to stop complaining. It's hard to see the ways that God has helped us. And yet that's what we're called to do. Can you imagine what would have happened if Moses was so caught up in his grumblings and his complaining about being there as a shepherd at the age of 80 years old that he missed the burning bush? Can you imagine what it would have been like if Moses just dismissed all of the complainers when he was with them in the desert and said, forget it, I'm leaving you guys? And maybe he would start complaining himself. You see, God helps us when the going gets tough, so that when things are going better for us, we can help others get out of their situations too. And I've discovered that in our church. We have a number of men who have gone through prostate cancer and surgery, and every time a new person receives this diagnosis, I've seen men help each other out and say, well, this is the surgeon you need to go to. This is the steps you need to take. You can survive this. And you know, there's no better place that I want to have prostate cancer. I'm not saying that to say I want prostate cancer, but I'm saying if it were to happen, I know that there are people who I could talk to who could help me through that. See, God has called us to be a community, not of complainers, but of experts who trust God to get us through. And the lesson from this final season of creation is that God does listen to us, that God does save, that God does provide. The same goes for parenting. I've been a better parent because of the lessons that many of you have taught me. And there are those who've experienced things and survived things that are similar to what we're going through. Now, we know that God does provide, and oftentimes it's not through direct divine intervention, but through the call that God places on our hearts to help other people. One thing that Rob and I experienced, and Christy too, and Chase, and Sophia, and Gabriel, and Wesley, and my wife, as we were sitting there at our cardboard shelters, and the kind of funny thing happened around 3 o'clock in the morning, everybody's shelters started falling in because when the dew starts laying heavy, roofs collapse.
Except for Rob's house.
Except for Rob's house. Our house was...
Our garage.
Man, that thing, it took a very hard shove. It was about 500 pounds, wasn't it, the cardboard? Yeah. But I started thinking about the people in Puerto Rico, in Mexico, in Florida, in Texas who don't have their homes. And what are they building their shelters out of? If they're relying on cardboard, well, we saw that what a heavy dew does. It will ruin everything. Are they finding tarps? Are they finding pieces of plastic to get through? What are they going to be doing for the next 6 months to a year? And how are we called to help respond to that? God helps us day by day. God gives us our daily bread. God saves us from the time of trial. And God is our God forever. And so today I challenge you. I challenge you to stop grumbling. I challenge you to listen to God. I challenge you to respond to God's call. I challenge you to help each other. And so now I challenge you to go in peace. Amen. All right. So, wow, that's my first clap, I guess, for a sermon. We are very excited to have the AOJs here. They're going to share a couple of songs, so we welcome them today. The ambassadors of joy, which we certainly need in this place we live in. Do we have all 4 of them? Oh yeah, Gary's over here. Okay. I've had to call out Gary twice now. All right, so